Hello everyone, welcome back to Democracy Insight. My name is Malcolm, I'm the founder and CEO. Now there is a chance that this video is going to age really badly for reasons I'll get onto in a moment. But what I wanted to do was to take a moment to talk about the Makerfield by-election result from the standpoint of democracy. Now we did talk about it while it was ongoing, what might happen, but we now know the result and the aftermath that's happening as a result of it. And things are moving along quite quickly, as I'm sure you know. As I record this, which is Sunday afternoon, Keir Starmer is, and I quote, reflecting carefully on his position, which I think could mean that he sets out a resignation timetable probably tomorrow, but he's taken the weekend to think about it. I thought it was quite poignant as well that Wes Streeting and Andy Burnham said they weren't going to make any public appearances, and I'm going to speculate on what I think that means for what might happen next. But firstly, we should look at Makerfield and how this has come about. So lots of interest in the by-election. Obviously Andy Burnham was in the quite absurd position in some ways. I read that and I thought that's probably the best way of putting it, where he was effectively standing for Labour but against Labour, saying he was going to change. There was an unspoken from him, but a very clear indication that he intended to stand for the leadership of so he was basically pitching himself as an alternative Prime Minister to Keir Starmer. So you had the absurd situation of Keir Starmer congratulating his potential replacement on returning to Parliament. It'd be very big of Keir Starmer if he genuinely felt that. So there's now like I say, things going on. But before I get to that, let's not get sidetracked by the current situation. I think in Makerfield there was sort of three major scenarios that would have come out. You could have more or less put any result into one of these three camps. The first one would have been if Reform had won the seat. It was always looking likely to be a 1-2, say a two-horse race, but a 1 and 2 for Labour and Reform. Reform vote coalescing around genuine Reform support and also people wanting to scupper Labour and scupper Andy Burnham's plans to go back to Parliament, which is really interesting because, like I said in the last video, it's actually much better for the opposition for Keir Starmer to stay where he is. So then we had another scenario, which was that Andy Burnham wins the seat, but the combined Reform and Restore vote would have knocked him off. So it would have been seen as, would have been a Reform win, but Restore, Rupert Lowe, got in the way of that. And that would have been the narrative that Nigel Farage and Reform would have used. The third scenario, which is pretty much the one that played out, was that Andy Burnham got a very good result, which places him, or would place him, and did place him, in a position of strength. So he could then go to Parliament with almost his own individual mandate to challenge. But the scale of his victory was so good that obviously a lot of good press. You had people calling it emphatic, you had people calling it a stunning win. He not only beat the Reform and Restore vote, but he actually beat all the other votes put together. So he couldn't have been elected with a better start. So you'll have been delighted with that. So I think now what's happening now is there'll be a few things going on in Parliament. Firstly, maybe the doubters of Andy Burnham, because everyone likes to back a winner, will now be thinking it looks like this could be inevitable. People who want to save their own skin, if they're operating out of seats that are vulnerable to the Reform swing right now, which is a lot of them, they are looking for a way to survive and perhaps let's say they can live with an Andy Burnham premiership if it helps them. Other people will see the tide and like I say, they like to back a winner. So it's likely that people who previously supported Wes Streeting, a few of them who probably supported Keir Starmer, what can happen often behind the scenes is people start to fall in behind the likely winner. And I think there'll be a bit of that going on now. So I think some of the reflections that they're talking about with Keir Starmer, some of his big supporters, Peter Kyle, who's far less ebullient about Starmer's chances than he was previously. I think there seems to be a momentum now towards that change, and that's largely based on the scale of his win. You know, there was, like I say, very credible scenarios that Reform could win the seat, particularly given the scale of Reform's performance in Makerfield in May. So I guess that moves us nicely on. I don't want to talk for too long on what I think might happen next. I think Keir Starmer will resign probably tomorrow. Like I say, the analysis will stand here, but perhaps the actual events will slightly change. He's always said he's going to stand, but in the face of this, and in the face of, you know, Cabinet potentially telling him that it's all over, and if he doesn't go, there'll be an orchestrated, you know, series of resignations. They don't all come at once. It'll be one after the other all day. There'll be a few big ones go, and it'll just be a crumbling wall, if you like, in a similar way that Boris Johnson suffered a few years ago. So I think that's what's going to happen now, and I think we're going to get Andy Burnham as the next Prime Minister. It's been interesting, sort of, when we're looking at it from the lens of explaining politics. This is how leadership changes can happen. Often very orchestrated, very strategic, based upon results, but based upon people's interpretation of results, based on self-interest, and also a wider consideration of, you know, what is the likelihood of, if Keir Starmer stays, of getting a successful result versus Andy Burnham. And then you've got ideological stuff, because Andy Burnham is generally, you know, somewhat centre left. He's certainly not he's a pragmatist as well. I think, you know, he was a Blairite, and then he you know, wasn't a Corbynite by any stretch of the imagination, but was certainly, you know, did what he had to do to survive, and then went and became Greater Manchester Mayor. I always find it fascinating, as someone who abjectly failed to make my way in party politics, how it can just, you know, whatever he wants to do, he gets to do it. You know, such as his appeal, and it looks like he's going to be Prime Minister. And it's been a long road for Andy Burnham. You know, I first met him when he was standing in 2010. It's a long time ago. You know, if you look back now, he looks very young, but it looks like he's going to get his chance. So we will obviously be following it from a democracy angle, and I hope you found that explainer helpful. So thank you for watching.